Hello and welcome to this James the Bike Guy, where today we're taking a look at the brand new Status 140 from Specialized. This is a 140mm all-mountain to enduro bike that's slated to be an affordable option that allows you to get top-tier performance, or so Specialized claims. So in this video, we're going to dive into that, as well as talk about all the features and designs of this bike, and finally, I'll let you know what it weighs. All right, talking Specialized Status. Now, the Specialized Status is a pretty cool bike that is brand new. Now, the model name Status has been around for a while as their entry-level park bike, but over the last couple of years, they've had a 140mm variant like this guy, as well as a 170mm variant, which was kind of the entry place into a bike park-ready bike. Now, this being 140, but still operating with a super stout alloy frame, means that the bike's really designed around being able to hit the local trails, go up north to the bike park, hit some features, and be a pretty overall playful bike for most everything. And with a price tag coming in at $3,500, compared to a lot of the other options out there, it's surprisingly affordable, albeit not cheap. I know $3,500 is not cheap, but in the world of trail bikes like this, it's fairly affordable, and it's nice to see that Specialized is playing in that game, as well as now opening up the Status to being a bike you can pick up in your local bike shop that carries Specialized, whereas the prior generation was direct-to-consumer only. So it's nice to see the opening of more ways to get this bike, to test ride it, to figure out if it's the right bike for you. Now, speaking of right bike for you, let's talk about what's going on with this frame. So as I said, this is aluminum. It's made out of their M5 aluminum. This particular one is in the raw finish, which is basically just a matte clear of sorts, or satin clear, on top of the aluminum frame. And by golly, it's pretty sweet. I love the way that this looks. You know, everything is definitely very raw. And while it won't look as clean as some of the bikes that have really been manicured up, in many ways, I prefer it to look like this, knowing that it's also going to look even better as the bike gets beat up and ages a little bit. But the frame set that's on this bike is really reminiscent of that prior generation Status. You've got internal cable routing, a 1.125 to 1.5 tapered headset, so standard issue there. And then out back, you've got a metric shock. Of course, this one being the Bomber Air shock from Marzocchi, but more on that later. And then out back is, well, you guessed it, FSR. So Specialized for a little while was getting away from their FSR 4-bar linkage, but here we go. It is back. And in fact, the bike, while being stripped down a little bit, it still has a adjustable flip chip in that horse link, which the magic with a horse link is that the bearing is before the rear axle. And what that does is that divorces your pedaling forces from interfering with the motion of the rear axle, as well as it allows them to get a more linear, straight up and down axle path, as you've got 4 independent bars. So you've got 1 bar here, 2 bar there, you've got your swing link, and then the bar connecting it, which is really just the seat tube. So here you're going to be able to isolate a lot of those pedaling forces. It also isolates braking forces, but it does mean that it leans a bit more on the rear shock for pedaling performance. So you'll notice this bike is a bit cushier than some of the other bikes that are out there, which also then means when you're screaming down, it's going to be really supple as well. But along with that, we've got threaded bottom brackets, all kind of standard issue to see with the bike, and 140mm of front suspension as well as rear suspension. But what's interesting with this bike is, especially for a 140mm trail bike, it is quite aggressive as far as the geometry is concerned. And in fact, I wanted to compare this to the new Stumpy 15, which also just came out, and I'll have a link to my review of that bike up above. But this bike with 140 front and rear, and in a size S4, which is what we're looking at here, has a head tube angle of 64 degrees, a seat tube angle effective at 77 degrees, a stack, which is the height of the front end of the bike, of 623 millimeters, and a reach of 496. Now, those numbers are very progressive, even by today's standards. And in fact, it means that you end up with a horizontal top tube length of 671 millimeters. Now, with all that bike geekery, what does that really mean? Well, when you compare that to a stump jumper in exactly the same size, even though the Stumpy has 10 more millimeters of front suspension and 5 more millimeters of rear suspension, the reach on the new Status is 21 millimeters longer. That's equivalent in a lot of bike models to almost 2 sizes of difference. The other place that's really noticeable is, of course, in that horizontal top tube measurement, which comes in at a whopping 45 millimeters longer than the stump jumper. So you're definitely not going to be looking at this bike thinking that, time is going to catch up with it real quick and you're going to be on outdated geometry, because it's clear Specialized is really pushing forward with the geo of this bike to make it as rowdy and as playful as possible. But the thing to keep in mind, and you can really even see it as we look at the bike here, is check out where the pedal is, or the crankset, I should say, going into the bottom bracket. It is really far back compared to the front wheel. Now, what that means is the front end of this bike is going to be super long, and you're positioned so far back that you're going to be turning the bike a lot of times with your hips and with your motion, basically pulling up on the front end of the bike, getting it to move around, meaning that the rear center of this bike is going to be quite short compared to the front center, making it really playful, taking away some of the climbing capability of the bike. But when it's pointed downhill, I think you'll be surprised with how much more capability is coming in this compared to some of the other all-mountain bikes that are out there. And I think that's hearkening into the enduro bike range of things that this bike is really based off of course, with its bigger brother being a 170 millimeter front and rear travel brawler. Keeping on with that brawling capability, the bike is set up with the Bomber Z1 fork. So this is a nice and chunky fork. The Z1 is more or less like a budget-friendly Fox 36, so 36 millimeter stanchions. You've got a grip damper. It is air adjustable, of course. Through axle up front with 15 by 110 millimeters up front. It is the thick grip damper, as I said. So, really a nice fork, a similar chassis to what you're getting with a Fox 36, but saving a few dollars. And out back is the Bomber Air Shock. Now, this Air Shock is going to give us a rebound adjust. You do also have a compression adjust on this rear shock. Pretty beefy, big can, and you are able to adjust it with air tokens, as well as take advantage of that piggyback oil reservoir so that even on choppy rides, it should be able to keep the oil cool and the shock performing pretty well. It's nice that that setup is metric, meaning it's non-proprietary. You can put basically any shock you want into the bike, including a coil if you wanted to. And in fact, that's an interesting mention between this bike and the 170 millimeter version. The 170 millimeter version comes coil spring out of the box. Now, along with that, we do rock a 29er front wheel, and out back it's a 27.5. So this is a mullet setup, which is also lending to some of that playful characteristics we talked about. And even at $3,500, it's pretty decently spec'd, coming with some Deity grips. Nice to see a brand name there. Of course, out back is the X-Fusion Manic dropper post. So with a quick lever lift, you're able to have that post come up and put your weight on it and bring it right back down. But the bike also has the TRP Trail Evo brakes, a 4-piston caliper on the front and the rear, clamping down on some really sizable rotors. And the drivetrain itself is the Shimano Deore 12-speed. So out back, you've got that wide range 12-speed rear derailleur going through a 10 to 51 tooth cassette. Up front, that crankset going through the threaded bottom bracket is a 32 tooth chainring. Of course, Hollow Tech 2, so hollow spindle going all the way through. and just a really impressive build for a bike coming in at about $3,500. So now that we've taken a look at this bike, it is time to find out what it weighs, and the actual weight of the Specialized Status 140 is going to come in and weigh 37.64 pounds. Thanks for joining me to check out the brand new Specialized Status 140. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts about this bike down in the comment section below. Do you think it delivers on the value prop that Specialized claims it does? And what would you want to compare this bike to in a future video?